Good afternoon, everyone. This is our last normal class. Next week, we have the exam at the same time. Just come in. I printed the exam. I stored it in my safety location. I stapled it. It's and it's ecologically sound in the sense that, there's about 5 copies that are not ecologically sound. The test is 10 pages long. If it's the non-ecologically sound version. If it's ecologically sound, it's only 5 pages long. I didn't feel like I should what happened was it had to do with the printer. For some reason, if you print it by Word, it doesn't, the Office printer doesn't want to do both sides. But if I convert it into PDF and use the PDF printer does both sides. So this is like a Twilight Zone reason why this, is the way it is. So I have a couple I'm going to keep the non-ecologically copies as kind of an emergency case. I should have enough copies. It should be 20 copies, more than enough. There's technically 20 students in the class. We have never been more than 16, so we've had 4 Go students, right? This is I call it the Go student phenomena. And then you should have the test in that sense, which would be a normal test. It has 3 parts. It should have a kind of a box, it has a little box of something, and then you fill in the step like you've had in the quizzes, okay? There'll be like empty boxes, and there'll be a question there, like what you have to fill in. You have to fill in each box and answer, okay? Like the division of powers, the 2 different types of division of powers: the ancient understanding and the modern understanding, and like all those things that you've got. If you study your quizzes, you should prepare yourself for your exam. Okay, that's the good thing. That's why I did this. I used the quizzes as kind of a preparation tool to help you study. In that sense. The second part is true false, and the last section is, again, like the first, but there'll be matching. You have to match something. There might be some questions that you have to circle the right answer. Okay, so therefore that's the way the course is designed in that sense. The exam is designed in that sense. 2 things. I'm obliged to remind people. I forget myself. I emailed everyone. Remember, I sent you a message a day or so ago about by the course system about the student evaluations. The student government insists that we still, not OSA student government, but the main student government insists that we spend even though it's ridiculous, because not every student has the app on their phone. Because they said, well, every student has the app on their phone. I go, no. And not every student has a computer there. And therefore, we don't do the physical things anymore, because we used to do the physical thing where you had to do it like this. We don't do that anymore. I don't have to give you the code as I used to do. Everything is built into the system, right? So please go fill it out. I understand this is your chance to get the knife and stab the teacher. I'm used to it, so I'm a big boy. It's not going to hurt my feelings. I'm not going to go cry or anything like that. But some teachers do. So some teachers, it kind of shatters. I have been told. Never me. I've always had a joke. I have not I have a big ego, but I have a healthy ego, and can and able to make fun of myself enough so the people complaining about me. It's the whole. I'm used to it, so therefore there. Please be honest, but this is your chance to think what you think about the course and ways it can be improved. Everything can be improved, so if you think there's mechanisms improvement, please, I do look at it in that sense. Some things can't be improved because like technology, like this stupid technology instrument, that won't work, and I can't get the passcode, and the IT staff is not available on Wednesdays. Okay, so therefore we're not having our PowerPoint. I have only became a user of, I hated PowerPoint, I still do. I think PowerPoint is a bad thing in most times. But I needed to do it for this course. I used to always use the Word. I used to have a power projection of Word on the thing and have little notes on Word. But, you know, the PowerPoint, someone said to me after being forced because of COVID to use PowerPoint, and also before that for the lecture, I had to use PowerPoint one time when I did the lecture, American government. They said, oh, you have to do it. And what happened was the publisher gave me a free set of PowerPoints for the lecture. So I didn't have to make anything. So it's like, that's why I miss America, because every teacher who teaches these textbooks often will get, the textbook company will produce a PowerPoint set for your lectures. So you don't have to go make them yourself. It's like, this is how easy it is. Because usually people do, I mean, I'm guilty of it too. When I make my own PowerPoint, I put way too much information on it, okay? That's, you know, a PowerPoint should have very little information. It should have just the basic themes like this, and that you should be taking notes. You shouldn't be using PowerPoints as a note system for yourself, right? And actually the real reason for this is to be able to show data and do data things. The closest thing I got to it was that infamous, I mean, I tried doing images and things like things. I remember that image of the communication and the system and the thing. And I also gave you the image of the, what is it? The other image was the image of the different democracy oligarchy triangles, you remember? The different, and I had to go fix it, you know, because I made goofs. I forgot to do something again. I don't. In America, university staff have specialists to help us. This is not the case in Poland. Every teacher is for themselves. Every teacher has to be an IT person. This is like, you know, I joke. I said this is worse than the Marines. When the Marines often always had, you know, the Marines got the worst equipment. Why? Because they wanted Marines to be mad and angry. Because it taught you how to improvise, adapt, and overcome. That was the Marine motto in that sense. So therefore, we were used to getting the secondhand crumbs. But when I came to Polish University teaching, I said, what? Teachers? You know, American teachers have, like, even a class this small, I would have an assistant. A class of 20, I would have, in fact, a full-time professor, a person at professor status, would have at least 2 or 3 graduate student assistants helping them the whole semester. And if you're doing the lecture, you'd have 6. Okay? When I said this to my colleagues here, they're looking at me, what world did you come from? I go, this is how it normally is. I mean, we should actually the law should be written that since the master students get free education anyways, they should do so much community service for the department. They should do about 10 hours a week of community service for this department, as a showing their gratitude of I mean, this is how scholarships. In America, all the students who have graduate study scholarships, they have to do about 10 hours of work a week for just, if they're not teaching a course, as part of their scholarship agreement, because sometimes the master's students and the doctoral students will often be teaching an undergraduate course, right? But if they're not teaching a course, they're assisting a course. They're helping the teacher assistant, or they're doing his copying for him, or else they're doing some work for the office. Okay, because while you're being taught the kind of internship. Your scholarship is kind of like an internship. But here, you guys go for free, and therefore you think it's, oh my God, I just don't have to do anything. This is one of the bad habits of Polish education, that you don't take your education. Many of you don't take your education that seriously, because it's for free. You know, everything for free, it's usually not respected. If you pay for it, you respect it. You bought something. You put what is that game from Taleb says, the skin in the game. You put skin in the game. So, but that's diatribe is mostly because that stupid freaking computer just is now not, for some reason, it updated, and it's not allowing me to access anything. I need a security code that I don't have, and like I said, the IT guy is not available. He only works on Tuesdays. Again, you have to understand that in America, in schools, the purpose of support staff, I did this rant yesterday, the purpose of the staff and the purpose of the tech teams It's not that we're all equal workers. This is left over from communism. Or we're all workers and we're all equal. No. The function of a university is to educate, right? So who is the primary deliverer of product? Teachers. Without teachers, there's no teaching. Therefore, no teaching, no university. Okay, it says research. Okay, fine. That's, again, research and teaching. These are the two things it does. So therefore, no researchers, So what are the staff, administrators? They are supposed to, what? Service who? Us, the teachers and the researchers. Why? To help us do our jobs more effectively. Without us, there's no reason for them. Okay? This is the logic of an organization. In other words, but the problem here is the administrators start thinking that they're the real reason for the institution, and that the staff, teachers, are to do their work for them by giving them, filling out the reports and doing, we have this report. Oh, please fill this report out for each of us. So in this course we have to do a report for. Do they have to do the report? No, I have to do the report. Okay? All these things. So therefore we have these jokes about this. And therefore, I'm rather annoyed that I can't show my PowerPoint. Well, it's a stupid little PowerPoint today because it's only two things. We're going to be spending most of the time on the prints because I wanted to finish the prints a little bit up, just to kind of get you the feel of it. The last two sections of the prints, which deals with, the virtue and character of the prints. Again, because we're focusing on the last part of the lecture focuses on leadership. Should focus on the question of leadership. In fact, today's reading if you read the reading specifically from the Lord's reading, chapters 24 through 26 of the modern prints, or our little modern prints, which you have, it focuses on Lord did a cute thing. He basically structured this book on the prints, identically. In other words, he purposely imitated Machiavelli regarding chapters, and also the themes he does echoes the chapters where Machiavelli addresses those same questions. So there is kind of this is why he calls it the modern prince. But this is basically a book about leadership and statecraft and statesmanship and leadership and democracies. Okay, and his latter theme is all about the problem of democracy. This whole theme of the book and the issues is the problem of leadership and democracies, particularly liberal democracies. Liberal democracy has a kind of love-hate relationship with leadership. It doesn't think it needs it. Modern democracy, modern democratic theory believes in the concept as kind of aggregate systems. And actually this is something that even works within Hobbes. Hobbes, in other words, everything is systemic. And that the real process, everything is a systemic process. So therefore, and everything's an aggregate systemic aggregation of systemic action. The individual actors acting in the system, and the outcome is basically done by the aggregation of actors' choices and interests, and therefore everything is nothing more than the aggregation of the individual, all the individual collective actors collectively making their decisions. And the aggregation of all those decisions and the processes and institutions that produces the outcome of the actions, okay? It's a giant systemic process, like economy. It's like an economy. So political choice is basically understood as one would understood, Alexander, right? Okay. As understood as one understands the economy. And he has to sign the sheet too. Yeah. Oops. I forget. You don't have my excuse of my age. There might be some other things involving, but I joke. My wife said to me, I'll get in trouble, but I don't care. I usually occasionally would like a belt. After having dealing with idiocy like this, I need a belt. I need a belt of something hard, like a bourbon or a whiskey or a rye, because the urge is to take a hammer to that. Okay, I have a funny story from graduate school, and I mean, before, no, undergraduate, not grad school. In the days when they didn't have PCs, we had at best you had as a terminal, and you had mainframes, okay? So, or you had a terminal that was a printer. So you had a keyboard with a printing device that would do the. I'm revealing my age when I say this. That's the world of computers that I remember. And there was this French student that was there, and he was a computer programmer. And we were in a computer lab, and we were writing things, and he did something, and the program crashed. His thing crashed. He wrote like thousands of lines. He had this big giant program, thousands of lines, and it just zooped. And he just screamed in French, "Mad!" Right? And he got up, he walks outside, and we thought, okay, that's it, now I'm gonna say. Then he comes in with a brick, and he smashes the terminal. And then he walks out again. And we're all thinking, okay, the first thing was scary, the second thing is coming. The next time, then 2 minutes later, he comes back in with another brick, and he smashes the next terminal. He then gets up again, and this time, when he came back with the third brick, everyone in the lab jumped him. He had to stop because there was only like 15 terminals, and we figured that he was going to wipe every terminal out. And he probably would have taken the brick or a baseball bat to the mainframe if he could access it, but this was a Saturday, and they locked the mainframe access. I think if he had the mainframe access, I think most of his violence would have been directed in that way. So I mean, the frustration, I didn't at the time I thought he was unreasonable, but the more and more I've dealt with computers, and particularly Microsoft and their tyranny of the attempt to limit your freedom. I mean, I remember when you could be able to access and code. You used to be able to turn off programs you didn't like. You used to be able to go into the access line, and let's say you saw some sub-programs you didn't like, you wanted to make your computer more efficient. You could, if you know what you're doing, you could just kill obnoxious subroutines that you didn't like. You can't do that anymore. You're not allowed to do that anymore. You're not allowed to tweak programs. You're not allowed to do anything. And you not even own your programs. You have to rent your programs. I remember used to buy a program, used to have it for okay, I had a program, it's old, but it worked. Why do I need it? If it worked, why do I need a new one? Now they don't want you to have that. They want you to keep on renting the program. So again, this kind of stuff only leads to violence and the desire to break something. And don't even mention, they're going to get me in trouble again, this whole idea of the delay of us moving. Again, because the other department can't see, their furniture hasn't arrived in their new office. The furniture for their new office they promised has not arrived yet. It's going to be delayed. So they're going to stay in their existing place. I responded, well, why don't you, and I talked to this, I says, why don't you move your old furniture to your new place? Oh, because we were promised new furniture. Who gives a fuck? Move. You're getting a new place. Go. You should be there now. Go. Actually, you should not have gotten the new place. We should have gotten the new place. But no, because you're important enough and you demanded a new place. You're in the same damn building. There's not going to be any difference. Oh, they think the new building's going to be nicer. No. It's going to have more problems because it's new, okay? They finally worked out the problems of the old building, so therefore they're moving there, and we're going to get the hand-me-downs. But see, they're not moved yet because they haven't got their furniture. And I'm just saying, God, give me a hammer, please. Give me a group of 5 guys. I'll clean out the room. I mean, I told Tomek and I told Dr. Grosh, I said, give me 10 clean guys, give me the keys, and I'll empty our rooms. The rooms that we're supposed to have. I'll do it. I'll throw all their crap outside. And if someone complains, I'll just call the police. Because I know the police minister. He owes me favors. I know the current Minister of Interior. He owes me favors. And I don't think the university really wants to have an investigation by the police in the activities of how they run things, really. So, particularly by a PIS government, okay? That's called leverage. But actually, this is a tool of leaders. Using leverage. Do I have to like PIS? No. I have to be able to use. My colleagues This is the thing of most of my colleagues are very left-wing, but they don't know the tools. If your boss is afraid of them, if your boss is afraid of somebody, use that as a means to leverage your boss. You don't have to like the tool you're using. You just have to use the tool you're using. Every tool has a use. And that's one of the reasons why Machiavelli is useful here. You learn that there's ends and means. The ends are the most important things. And leadership is about knowing what the ends are, defining the ends, and then doing what? Figuring which means are best able to achieve that end. The famous line, the ends justify the means. Absolutely. But another problem is people believe in the means too much. They fetishize the means. Because what is the court? The court and law and these things, the tools. Remember the tools we had, the eight tools? Sometimes people look at law and they fetishize the law. They fetishize the court. Law is a tool. It's not an end in itself. Diplomacy is a tool. It's not an end in itself. The tools are means. They service the ends. The tool you use, in other words, you need to use when you pick your end, you have to decide which tools you need. That's the judgment of a ruler, deciding which tools will help you get the end you want. How to achieve the end you want. What is the goal or the end you're trying for? What tools best help you get it? Okay? And best means, again, cost benefit, but also the question of people's likability. Some people, how can I say this? Modern societies have weak stomachs. You know what I mean by that? The modern democratic world has a weak stomach. You don't like harsh methods. You want the world to be nice and comfortable. You want safety and softness. I'm sorry, sometimes the reality is kind of harsh and brutal. And sometimes and this is the other thing. The nice liberal world you live in relies on fear. The whole modern concept, the whole modern state from Hobbes onwards is relying on fear. Why? Our fear of chaos drives us to form the state. Our fear of the chaos where everyone is at war with each other and the violence of the chaos and the barbarian. Our fear of having our lives harmed. The fear of having our persons assaulted, right? This drives us to want to gives much of our autonomy away so that someone will protect us, right? This is the whole social contract, right? The whole purpose of the state is to provide security and safety and benefit. And therefore, how do they do that? By punishing the wicked, punishing those who threaten the security. The whole civil system rests on fear. What is law? Law is a threat. Any law has an implied threat. You break it, you're going to get punished. That's a threat. A threat of violence. A threat of coercion. In other words, fear what makes the modern liberal world work. But the problem is, people don't like that. People want to live in, most of us live in a world, because they don't experience the horror. They live normal lives, and they live their normal thing, and they don't experience the exception or the need for the force or violence. And therefore they think, oh, this is the normal. But it's not the normal. Yes, it's normal in the sense that this has become the normal because of the system working properly. But this normal relies on a very much a system of people who are operating. Now, the other things, modern democratic societies don't like leadership because, one, it's tied to older, in other words, democracy doesn't like it because they look at leaders as kind of autocratic systems. I mean, you see this in a lot of the criticism that liberals and neoliberals make of populist leaders. my God, leaders. If he's a leader, if he talks about leadership, this is fascistic. Anyone who promotes popularist leaders are going to be fascistic. What nonsense. In other words, why can't you escape leadership? You can't escape elites, you can't escape leadership because of the question of size. In other words, remember the participation problem. Any large-scale society, any large-scale unit, everyone cannot equally participate. Just think about this. Imagine in a group of 1,000 people, you gave every person 10 minutes, right? So that becomes 1,000 people. That's 10,000 minutes to make every decision. So how much time is that? Divide by 60. That's how many minutes it takes. Divide by Divide by 60. Every minute of that is an hour. So 60 of that. That's how many hours you have. Divide by 24. That's how many days it takes. Just do the math, and you see what the problem of that, right? That any large-scale structure, the reality is you gave everyone. Therefore, not everyone's going to participate. We're all not going to be equally participate at the same level. Some are going to participate more than others, and particularly those who have. Someone has either a stake in the game, something to win, or they have ambitions to win. Therefore, someone who has a stake will participate, and those who have an interest in that stake, or those people who have stakes. And in other words, they have skin in the game, right? This famous tabline, the skin in the game argument. You have skin in the game, you'll participate. You'll be active. If you have no skin in the game, you won't care. And then there's another person who wants ambition. They don't necessarily have skin in the game, but they want skin in the game. The ambitious. Therefore, you have the reality of large scale in a society is that it's basically who participates is often in a large scale modern society, the people who participate is self-selecting. So they're not going to, first of all, the people who participate and don't participate, there's a lot of apathy in democracy. This is why you look how voting happens. A good significant population don't vote. Why don't they vote? Because it doesn't affect them too. They don't believe it affects them. In other words, they in their lives don't feel affected by the choice. In other words, this is not important enough for them that they have any skin in the game, that they would bother wasting time doing it. Okay? And some would argue that's good. When most people think that's not important, in other words, when everyone thinks political choices are very important, that is usually a sign of crisis. If you think that the political answer, rulers, the political system, is your answer to your solution or is important enough that everyone cares about it, this is usually a sign of a society in trouble, not a society healthy. A healthy society, the majority of the society should be apathetic. Apathy, now this is an argument. The pluralist model argues that apathy is good. Participation is only needed when what? Participation is for the stakeholders that care. And as long as participation is open, the stakeholders that care. If you want to force everyone to be active equally, you're just inviting a mess. Once you start forcing people to engage in politics, they will engage in politics, and their politics ain't going to be yours. And it's going to be uglier. The apathetic are apathetic for a reason, because usually what they want is not possible, usually not able to be achieved, and what they want, if you try to achieve it, would bring horrible results. So therefore, that's why we have apathy is a sign of stability in some systems. So here's the other problem about this. This is another aspect of this. Leadership thus becomes a problem in this sense. Democratic societies don't like this. The system doesn't like leadership. Leadership is self-selecting. Who's a leader and who's legitimately a leader? You need to have, this takes us back to the famous Weber. Remember Weber thing of the different types of authority? Traditional, legalistic, and then charisma. Well, this is the point. And actually rereading Weber's famous, Weber dies in 1920, okay, but during the Spanish influenza outbreak. He died like in his late 50s, okay, but he was still a very young man. In that lecture, he talks about leadership, the charismatic leader being important to in a democratic system. There's going to be a connection between a charismatic leader. Remember, the German word is Führer. The word for leader in German is Führer. Nice normal word, Führer. It's become poisoned because of Adolf. You can't use, people get, this is what, by the way, this is why you can't talk about leadership in Germany. Because that little word, the Führer, the leader, the Führer, oh my God, it's almost kind of like, oh God, no. We must not, we're nice democratic people. We don't talk about the Führer. The Führer is bad. The Führer is bad. Bad, okay, this is a democratic vice, the idea that leadership is not important. The meaning of the word leader means only that he's the leader. And the democratic leader is going to be charismatic, mostly. In democratic societies, usually the charismatic is going to be the person that will motivate the greatest support among the many, right? Why do the people like, who do the many like? Come on, think of movie stars. Why do people watch things? It's often because of attractiveness, likability. These will be people who the many will normally choose as leaders. This is why the beautiful or the attractive have a much easier time in life than the ugly, right? Because the many will simply just be likely to respect them or be attracted to them or be wishing to earn their favor or trust, right? So therefore, this is part of the natural problem of this. So leadership is something, systemically, because of the need of operation, there has to be, what's always is going to happen is that there's going to be a few people running the show. Any organization will always lead to, any effective organization will end up reducing the participation in a way, either systemically, structurally, so what you do is you allow input from the many, but you don't expect that much participation. The actual participation will be done by elites. So modern democratic theory, often behind it, if you look carefully, you'll see elites, like mass democratic party structures. Who are the engine behind the parties? It's the elites. Who are the representatives? Usually the localized or regionalized elites, who then formalize the basis, who will become representatives in the parliament or people who are selected for ministry posts. This is why the Italian school, the famous Italian school of Pareto, Michaels, and the Iron School of Oligarchy argument is Mosca. Those three, Mosca, Pareto, and Michaels. All this school of this at the turn of the 20th century argued for elite structure. Now everyone misunderstands this. They see that and say, "Oh, this means that they're really autocratic, pro-fascist." No, this is any system. They're arguing on the nature of any system will do this. Any large-scale system, and for it to work well, you have to create a mechanism of division of labor, division of operations, and that therefore what's going to happen is that to be able to work effectively, you need coordination of decision makers and outcome products. And therefore, who's going to get those positions? There are the people who are best capable to do that. Usually, the people who are skilled, and therefore they go to school. They're selected out of usually the elites of the society. There is a connection between intelligence and elite status. Because why? What happens? People who have good ideas, over time, the people who had good ideas that helped the community to survive were usually the more intelligent, and therefore usually their children, and they pass on, and their intelligence is passed succession genetically. Therefore, who's going to be likely the future leaders and the future people? Those who've inherited the genetic habits of intelligence of their ancestors. And if you have a large society, in other words, if you have a very large society of, let's say, a couple million, right, 100,000 to a million, well, that's going to still be a large number. It'll be like maybe 10, 15%, maybe 20, with high levels of intelligence. One standard deviation higher than the average. Okay? 2, 3 standard deviations, these are the geniuses, and these people always often have being 1 standard deviation, you tend to have normal behaviors. Higher genius levels, higher intelligence usually have a lot of bad other traits, like sociopathy. Real geniuses also tend to have antisocial traits, high levels of antisocial traits. If you studied psychology, a little bit evolutionary psychology, you'd see this. Personality, the connection between intelligence and personality. There is that the very high genius level is the most scary thing. They're asocial. They tend to be not nice people. Okay, brilliant people, truly brilliant people, are usually not nice. They're egoistic, selfish, and be that way. That's the nature. So therefore, but someone who's basically 1 standard deviation higher, these tend to be like the norm. And these are usually your leaders in your societies. In other words, they're not genius, because usually when a genius enters politics, he's usually hated. Someone who's a very genius level factor, who's politically, he's usually envied. His behavior is such that he will get enemies, and he will be hated. Like Hamilton, for example. Hamilton is a perfect example. Hamilton was probably, he was a genius from the understanding of things. If you look at his ideas of economy, the economic models he did, the way he his graduating law school and as a young man, leaving Jamaica and his family, going to New York as a teenager to go to school on his own, and starting up his own newspaper, at 15, 16 years of age. So therefore, this is if you look at someone like Hamilton, you say that, but at the same time, he is a troublesome personality. Now, that gives us the nature of these things. Leadership is this problematic. It's we talked about the need of a democratic society. They don't like leaders. It doesn't want them, but it still needs them. In other words, a democratic society, democratic system still need leaders. It doesn't like them. It kind of thinks it's above them. So this is why at the end of the book, he says, we need to, this is why Lord at the end of the book talks about the need to prevail against the time, right? You need to really fight against the prejudices of the time and fight against the prejudices of the democratic mind. Because no matter how much the democratic theory hates leaders, they need it. And leadership has to be taught. It should be taught particularly to the elites who are going to be the leaders. And this is the most funny thing. In American institutions, the elite schools think they're no longer elite. They hate the concept of the elite. They do as much to undermine the old status of their. In other words, the elite institutions in America think they're meritocratic. And they believe themselves to be meritocratic. And therefore they do everything they can to escape any sign of eliteness. But then what happens, because they're meritocratic, they become even more elite. In other words, the funny thing about a true meritocratic model is that it's worse than the old elite system. The old elite system often allowed, just because your family ties, right, because of who you were and your things, allowed normal people to go through the system, not just only the best. Yeah, because you were related to them. Okay, you went to the region, you went to the schools with the other guys, so therefore you went to the right schools, but you're not necessarily super brilliant. You're just average, and therefore, you're going to be picked. But you're average enough, and you're going to be trained enough that you can hold a mid-level position or a mid-level command in the city in the society. Okay, but all of a sudden, what happens when you make the school totally meritocratic? Those people can't get in. And therefore, these people don't go to these schools. They don't become elites in their institutions, their local areas and that stuff. What happens, now everyone who gets in these things think they're the best. And they deserve to be best where? At the height of everything. They want to be in Washington. They want to be at the center of things. Do they want to stay in their small hick town? No. They don't want to go back to their local area and that thing. They want to be in charge. And they view themselves as citizens of the world, not citizens of their own location. So therefore, the irony here is the older system, which was less than totally meritocratic, was far more less destructive to a egalitarian society. In other words, the non-democratic, more aristocratic character of the old higher education of the 19th and early 20th century, of the elite schools, was less destructive to the democratic character of the regime, the egalitarian democratic. In fact, it kind of preserved it in a way, unintentionally. But once it was turned into a meritocratic thing, what happened? It undermined completely the democratic character of the regime. Because what happened? Now you have all these people going to the elite institutions thinking that they're the best. And they look down on those who not one of them. Therefore, they know that they are the best. Getting into Harvard is so difficult. Getting into Harvard is more harder than graduating from it. Just by getting into Harvard, you're a superstar. That people will give you money. Look at. Come on, just think of this. Think of Bill Gates and Zuckerberg, dropouts from Harvard. But people were willing to give, because they were Harvard, they assumed, oh, you must be brilliant, must be genius, therefore, I'm going to give you millions of dollars. You understand how that works? That therefore, just by getting in, that they have already achieved what most people have to work for. So that's the danger of a meritocratic system. It creates a situation of people who believe that they're entitled because of their fact that they got into the system, and therefore they must be because they competed. So Harvard gets about 500,000 applications, and they only accept like 3,000 students. In other words, it's easier to get a lottery ticket sometimes than winning a lottery ticket. No, I think it's still higher. Getting into Harvard is slightly more easy than winning a lottery ticket, but it's actually better in terms of but it's still very low probability that the average person will get in. Okay, and the other elite schools, so Yale, Stanford, same probability problem. And that's why you have these different schools, so therefore the probability model goes like, so therefore that 10% of society who have that level of intelligence will get in the system. It perpetuates itself. But it no longer localizes it anymore. It comes the pecking order. Harvard, Yale. In other words, there's a hierarchy of where to go. So therefore, number one is number one, and number two is number two. You have a rank system. Who's more important? Again, that's based upon where you go to school. In other words, this is ironic. It creates a caste system. I went to Harvard or I went to Yale. Before that used to be only mean 50 years ago, 60 years ago, it only meant that you were from that region. Or you went to a certain prep school. Now it means the difference between being all super smart and some very super smart, you know. So that goes there. And therefore, the last thing we have to talk about is the problem of occasions and time we talked about last time. That every time, all leadership requires occasions to act. It requires two things. Virtue, in other words, your abilities, the ability an occasion to act, and virtue, that is the ability to act. In other words, having the skills necessary, having the skills and the capacity to utilize the opportunities. Now, opportunities in normal times are rare. Why? Because in a democratic society, the democratic process does not it doesn't really like the idea of individuals having too much input in the system. Therefore, the nature of competing interests in a democratic system will often prevent anyone who wants to be a real leader to lead. He has to always work with, if a leader works in this case, he always has to work within under the umbrella of existing interests. Okay? He couldn't just, in other words, any attempt to overcome the existing interests would probably end up in failure in normal times. It's only in unnormal times or crisis times that an occasion happens that you can redefine the system. In other words, only in crisis can actors have the occasion to be able to get the people or the society to change or to alter the system in a real way. If things are working okay, people don't want to change it. They prefer the status quo. That is that famous line in the Declaration of Independence. There's that prudence dictates that when most people prefer the evils they know, the evils they don't know. That famous line that's in the second paragraph about prudence dictates. Well, that's true. The normal time, most people's perception would be that they would prefer if the system is working, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it ain't broke. And they have to believe it's broke. Once society believes the system is really, even the system could be not broken. The system could be very broken, but if the society doesn't care, or the society does not really believe it's broken, or they don't, or the key decision makers are benefiting from the system being broken, then there's still not enough. In other words, if the leaders in society are benefiting from the breaking of the thing, and mass society does not have the masses don't have enough energy to change the system. It's always the decision makers and the elites who are the real people who make the decisions. So if there's a division of interest between the interests of the elites and if the elites in the system are benefiting from the broken system, they're not going to change it. So the fact that the majority of the population sees it's broken, the only time is when the elites themselves feel they're broken. And that's when they're feared. In other words, this is a tipping point happens. A tipping point is when their lives and their property are threatened. And that's actually very bad. This is why most modern leaders in modern Western democracies are assholes. Because they don't realize that by their unwillingness to fix the system that's clearly broken for the majority of the population is only going to get worse over time, and that's going to produce a boiling point where it's going to blow up like it's going to repeat like the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution. In other words, the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution are really a point where the elites lose control over the masses, and the masses get so angry at the corruption and the breakdown of the system that they just simply explode and just use violence against the system, against the whole system. And the elites lost control. In other words, the elites lost control of power. And this is something we'll talk about in Machiavelli today. This is the danger of being held in contempt. Why it's okay to be feared, but if you're hated or held in contempt, you're fucked. Because why? Because if the masses hate you, what is the only thing saving you? You have power. What happens the second you no longer have power? The masses will tear you to shreds. Look what happened to Gaddafi. You ever saw the video what happened to Gaddafi when the people got a hold of him? They tore him to shreds. The mob literally tore him to shreds. In fact, the only reason they didn't do that to Saddam Hussein was because the U.S. military immediately grabbed him once the Iraqis got a hold of him. And then the American military, then they handed him over to the authorities and they said, you got to try him. The Iraqi government, the Shiite government just wanted to take him out into the Shiite population and, how can I say, let them chop him to bits. Instead, they hung him, okay? They had a trial and then they found him guilty and then they hung him like the Americans hung the Nazi leadership at Nuremberg, right? They imitated us. Okay. Yes?
I wanted to ask regarding revolution. Do you think that there is a possibility of revolution occurring in the next 2 years in Russia?
No. Because Russian society is completely not like the Russians. In other words, the Russian society is too weak and too minimalized. In other words, it's been so destroyed over time, and it's mostly, the danger of it is not that it's going to revolution, it's going to break apart, because the eastern parts of, in other words, much of Eastern Russia, which is Asia, is no longer Russian. It's ethnically different populations. It's mostly Chinese now. Much of Eastern, I mean, that's why he's throwing Ukrainian. They moved about 150,000 Ukrainians out of Eastern Ukraine. I mean that part they captured, and they moved these so-called refugees, and they dumped them where? Vladivostok. Why? To Russify the location. The good old Stalin's approach to kind of keeping the ethnic balance in the East good enough Russia. He's not going to move Russians, because the Russians would move. Most Russian society is not strong enough, and most of their boys are dead, are getting killed now. So therefore, there's a big problem. No, Russia won't have a revolution; it'll just fizzle out. As T.S. Eliot said in his famous one of his poems, the Four Quartets, not with a bang but a whimper. I got in trouble a day ago when we had a discussion about, someone said, aren't you afraid that Russia is going to use nuclear weapons, and that, the Russians are going to, and that this is irresponsible to let Moscow is going to use nuclear weapons, and we should not, Western Europe and America should, these American authors, we should be thinking about it's not in our interest. And I said, it's a bluff. He's not going to use nuclear weapons. Why? He said, why do you say that for? He says, the second he does, we use ours. Ours works, they don't. Theirs will probably blow up on the platform. Ours won't. Ours will destroy their cities. Yes, they might destroy half the American cities, big cities. But from an American point of view, being honest, will that really hurt America? No. It's called urban renewal. Most of our cities are big cesspools of backwardness, corruption, and cost. If all the cities are awake, all those social problems disappear. And red state America, how healthy is that? Can they live without, who has the food? Who has the energy? Who has the ability? The learning is decentralized. In other words, American culture is decentralized regarding education, structures, institutions, and things like this. It's not urban-centered like Europe. Russia, you destroy your Russian cities, what happens to Russia? the rural peasants won't be Russian in 20 years. They'll be something else. Russia will cease to exist as a civilization if they use nuclear weapons. Because they'll be wiped, their cities and their things will be wiped out. American cities will be wiped out, but who cares? Because America is not its cities. And it would actually reduce a lot of American costs and problems, and it'll be a better America, stronger, tougher, ruthless America. You ever watch that? There's a TV series in the 1980s, early 2000s called Jericho. Watch it. It's about the post-apocalyptic. This idea that everyone's going to be wiped out. I'm sorry, none of you have not really studied nuclear science. I had to do that a little bit. If we do go boom, 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 it's not going to exterminate the world. Most of the world is going to live perfectly well. The big cities will be just toxic waste zones for decades. But that means you're going to revert back to the... But that wasn't that the way it was when the barbarians came in the 600 BC to 800 BC and they sacked all the European cities and everyone lived in the outskirts again, right? The Dark Ages. So we have another Dark Age, a 200-year, 300-year Dark Age. Who's going to be the biggest power coming out of that? Which existing system is going to survive? It's going to be the Americans. Why? Because American culture in the rural areas is going to have the identity of the Roman, the civic. Who are the real people who love America and send their boys to die America? Rural Americans. Who has the identity of the Americans? Urban Americans or rural Americans? Rural Americans. So who's going to be able to feed themselves, survive themselves, and do that? Rural Americans. So if you're really threatening, you're Moscow and you're threatening to use nuclear weapons, and is that really a threat? Honestly? Think about that. Because if you use it, you cease to exist. And a statesman, remember, the statesman should not be concerned about the now. He should be concerned about the future. That this Russia exists. Now, Vlad, do you want to be the man who extinguished Russia? Go ahead. History will remember you as the clown who used nuclear weapons and destroyed Russia and produced the future American power that will be even more ruthless and more militant than the current America. Okay? Now, what actor would do that? You understand? That's real decision making. Someone should say to him, I don't understand. Everyone wants to be nice and plop. The best way to be diplomatic to some people is saying, I'm sorry, this is our diplomacy. You grab them by there's a famous line by, it is a famous saying by Theodore Roosevelt. Grab them by the balls and their hearts and minds will follow. And you do that. This is a good aspect of leadership in that sense. That being a diplomacy too. Diplomacy is, nice. No, diplomacy means when the camera's not on, when things are not there, you go to them and say, listen, Vlad, is it really in your interest? Are you really going to threaten? You're threatening. I don't believe you're honest. Because in an exchange, who's going to really win here? Or it's not going to be equally, the argument, we'll be both dead. No.
Came to Moscow like a few months ago before the invasion started. There was a brief moment when the cameras started to leave the room and the cameramen started to leave the room, and one microphone catching the line from Mr. Lavrov, who said to Liz Truss, the cameras are out, so what do you really want to speak about? So, yeah.
I mean, that's the reality. The cameras are there. Democratic societies have to always be nice. I mean, that's the famous scene in Thucydides. When the scene where the democratic Athens tells the people of Salamis, might makes right. Now they said, would you say that would you say that speech in front of the Athenian assembly? Hell no. But we're not in front of the Athenian assembly. I'm just talking reality here. Okay? Well, that's I mean, I don't want to get, I'm being shocking here because I want you to think about these things. You should think real political decision and choice always is about thinking these things. It's about thinking the realities of choice. And the idea that, I mean, this is where, I don't know if anyone watched the interview with Sean Penn. Sean Penn is an actor. He's, never liked his politics. I remember he was a left-wing, radical left he was with the Contras, and I helped train people who trained the Contras. His politics and my politics are like completely opposite in that sense. And he was usually I consider him an idiot. But I have a rule: even idiots can even a broken clock is right twice a day. Sometimes even an idiot can say the true thing. That's why, unlike some of my American right-wing friends, I don't have what they call, if just because Soros says something doesn't mean it's wrong always. Always listen to what is being said and judge the thing being said, not who's saying it. Okay. Now here's the other problem here. The problem here is the problem of understanding the way the system operates in leadership things, about how you have to operate, make the decision. Now, I don't particularly like taking the idea of the broken clock theory. You have to understand that the reality is going to sometimes be that they're wrong. Sean Penn, when he experienced, and I was surprised. Go watch the interview with Hannity. He interviewed Hannity, and there's a very funny opening. He says, "When I first contacted you, you said you didn't trust me." And actually, the line was, "Yes, I don't trust you, and there's reasons why I don't trust you, but I don't trust a lot of people." And he said, "But events are now so dramatic and so important that it would be stupid for me to let such personal squabblings interfere with being able to talk about an important thing where we agree on." And I was like, an adult statement from a person who I normally think is a complete moron. Ooh, why is this possible? And the reason why it's possible, because what he witnessed in Ukraine changed him. You saw this. If you watch how he talks about Ukraine and the trauma of his voice. This is not acting. That's my training and my time in the military is interrogating people and reading body language and reading things. That was sincere. Because you can tell by the way your eyes are moving whether I'm talking to you, I can tell when you're lying. Because when you lie, your eyes will move to a certain different part of your head than when you're telling the truth. When you go to your eyes a certain way, you're going from memory, and the other ones you're going to imagination. So that's how you can usually watch someone and look how their eye language. Now, if you're really trained, you have to be trained not to do that. So if you're all of a sudden you're not doing that, I know you're trained, so I use a totally different mechanism of interrogation. So, but if you're not trained, your eyes tell me everything. When you're answering, and you do this all the time. I answer a question. The ones who are kind of guessing the answer, their eyes move one way, and those who remember the answer go the other way. So therefore, this is a skill that I learned and I understand. So therefore, you can always know. And I look at the interview, and I'm saying, "Oh my God, this is not acting. This is not acting. This is not someone who's memorized his lines and doing like this. This is a serious kind of." And he made a very. I recommend watching that scene because he made one of the most brilliant statements I've ever heard anyone make. That is, what does it say about a world where a guy with the nuclear weapon just constantly threatens to do it, and everyone else backs down because he has a nuclear weapon? How safe is that world? Okay, maybe we're going to have to think about the necessity of dealing with that. Mr. Pacifist banned the bomb just basically made an argument for his first strike against the nuclear actors who are, you don't feel that they have, who have the weapon, who are not trustworthy with the weapon, who might use who have already used the weapon to blackmail people. See how shocking that is? Again, I don't think that's a responsible choice, but you see the journey there. Again, this is the problem of the reality of dealing with crisis. He never dealt with these things. He's dealt with a world that's perfect. He deals with this world and he looks at the world in chaos and he says, "Oh, it should be like us." This is the mistake Roosevelt made, not Theodore, but Franklin Roosevelt with Russia, Moscow. He just viewed Stalin as one of him. Stalin is like me. He's a leader. Now, he rules a less enlightened society, so he has to be more brutal. But then again, we have less enlightened groups in our society also. The Democratic Party has these redneck Southerners who are seasick, He ruled, remember, he was Democratic president. And he got into power because of secession, because of the segregationist Democrats in the South. Without the Southern Democratic bloc was 50% or more, maybe even 60% of the Democratic vote that elected Roosevelt. If the segregationist South did not support Roosevelt, Roosevelt would not have been able to be president. So no matter how much his wife would talk about Negro rights, it was never on the top. In fact, it was the opposite. His economic policies often expanded segregation, particularly economic segregation, against the Southern blacks. Okay, but this is the funny thing. He just thought, well, Stalin is just like my Southern Democratic colleagues. No, they're not the same. The Southern Democratic guys are bad guys, and not necessarily nice people. They look down and treat the blacks differently, but they're not murderous thugs who will be willingly exterminate. Even no matter what you want to say about segregation, it was never the Gulag. The plantation was never the Gulag. And anyone who argues that doesn't understand, because what happened in the Gulag? Do people reproduce and have children in any significant number? No. In the Nazi concentration camps, did people reproduce? So don't go talking, in the plantation, did slaves reproduce and have children? And actually dramatically grew. Because it was profitable to allow the black, because as property, a new black child was worth something. You understand the perverted attitude about this? Therefore, they'd encourage your slaves to have children and want them to do it. Because this meant you had an asset in the future that you could develop and worse. Okay? That's the perverted aspect of slavery, right? Treating people as institutes. So that, you can't compare these two things together. So even though the segregationist or the slaver is a horrible person, one would not want to be ruled by them or be treated like how they would treat the people they thought as property or inferior. But they're not a cold, bloody tyrant who's going to decide that your group needs to be eliminated because you're a threat to my power. Okay? And he's not sociopathic like Beria. Did you read? Go read about Beria. Okay, how many of you seen the movie Death of Stalin? Isn't it a great movie?
Yeah, it is.
It's a comedy, but it's so true. This is a case of the comedy being darker, more true, being true to the reality. Because if you saw the reality without the comedy, it would be just impossible to watch.
It's a documentary, right?
No.
No, it's a comedy.
It's a comedy. It is a great comedy. It's by, what's his name? It's the Italian guy. He did The Office, the guy who originally did the BBC, the British Office. He also did the thing called Yes Minister. Yes. He did a series in Britain, a great political series called In the Thick of It, which is the modern version of Yes Minister. If you want to understand administration and bureaucracies in modern democratic societies, watch the BBC series Yes Minister. That's the bureaucracy of the 80s and 90s, okay? To understand modern bureaucracy, go watch The Thick of It. It is the office, not the American office, because the American office is completely nice and made nice for an American audience. In other words, go watch the British office. The British office is completely different than the American office. And the thick of it is basically the British office, the office, meets yes minister and yes prime minister. And then you have the role of spin doctors, things like this. This is the way it works. Again, this is how leadership works. Modern leaders work within the framework of these structures, these bureaucratic structures. And how does leaders do it? Today, we control the bureaucracy through spin. When I introduced my wife to Yes Minister, she was like, "They should make a Polish version of this." Because we have friends who work in the ministry. My best friend is a senior civil servant in the Polish ministries. I know a lot of people. I know a lot of his friends. I know the reality of this, and much of how Yes Minister is how the ministries are in Poland to this very day. Okay. And why am I talking about this? Because this is the way, the structure of what we expect to happen in things. That you're going to have to, watch. This is where, okay, we're a culture studies department. I'm going to try to culture study you. Go watch. You want to understand administration? Okay. Don't bother with that horrible American TV series. What's his name? What? The one about politics with the House of Cards. The American House of Cards is crap because it doesn't work that way. It doesn't reflect reality. It's really an imitation of a British 3-part series. The American House of Cards is imitating something done by the British, like a lot of TV. Okay, much of American TV imitates what's been done elsewhere. Okay. The famous thing that The Good Doctor about the Down syndrome thing, it's imitating a Korean show, okay? Much of modern American TV is imitating other things, okay? The British series in the House of Cards is much darker, and it basically is the post-Thatcher time. The post-Thatcher, pre-Blair time, okay? 3 miniseries, 3 miniseries. Okay, 3 parts House of Cards. The modern House of Cards has nothing the reality of the real House of Cards, or American politics. In fact, this is what the guy you mentioned, that Italian director, he's a British guy, but he has an Italian name. He tried mixing the movie, an episode called In the Loop, where he tried to mix about the Iraq War. He tried to mix the British system with the American system, and he totally misunderstood the American system. In fact, it's so bad, this is why I can't recommend watching Veep. Veep is about the vice president. It's a disaster. It is completely not realistic. This is why the famous West Wing was great. I remember Levitsky when he was here, West Wing, we're watching West Wing, and West Wing was watched because it was so realistic. West Wing was very much realistic of how the presidency and the staff operated. That's why it's not documentary, it was a TV show. And yes, the liberal was better liberal than any, if that liberal was if Josiah was your really typical Democratic liberal, then it would have been good to be ruled by Josiah. But the reality, in other words, they're never that good. They make the Republicans out to be evil all the time. This is Soren. He wants to make them out to be always, the Republicans are always these hungry people going, it's cartoonish, where the liberal Democrat is this noble, wonderful, self-sacrificing guys. In reality, it's the opposite. But neither side is good or noble. And sometimes the liberals are just as vicious in that. Come on, I know the story. Ted Kennedy and Chris Dodd used to joke about waitress sandwiches. During lunch and at the bar, because they used to have their lunch liquid, in Washington in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, when I knew them, because I worked with at the time of my appointment, they would sit in the bar and they used to pick up waitresses and things like this and go to the Senate. Senators could easily get a hotel at the Hotel Large right across the Senate, big major hotels, 2 or 3 hotels right there. They would go from the Senate chamber down across the street, across where the Senate offices are, go right to the hotel lobbies, go up there and pick up girls. And then take them after that evening up to the thing and have a waitress sandwich, the joke was. Okay? The reality of, this is, I mean, the reality of the typical liberal Democrat was they got in, the liberal Democrat, okay, liberal Democrats usually got in trouble for sex. Republicans tended to get in trouble for money. Republicans usually collapsed because of some money scheme or some deal or financing or something. Now that kind of changed a little over time, but these are the two principal sins of a politician: money and sex. And actually, Me Too almost wiped out the Democrats. See, Me Too, for a long time, the powerful Democrats had the escape from sexual harassment card. Right? Me Too stopped that. I mean, I kind of liked Epstein. What's his name? Not Epstein. Who's the movie producer?
Weinstein.
I loved it when Weinstein and all those Hollywood lefties fell to the sword. These people are usually the biggest scum people on the earth, and they were the biggest donors to left-wing causes. They would give to Emily's List millions of dollars. They would they threw money at the progressive left and right. So therefore, when all of a sudden the Me Too thing bit them in the ass, I was like, yes, please, poetic justice. These people deserve. When is Bill Clinton gonna get lynched? Where is? I mean, to me, it's like, oh, please, you've destroyed us for days now. Finally, it's coming home to roost. But there's a rule. It still doesn't. Won't sacrifice. They didn't sacrifice Biden. I mean, come on, Biden should have been sacrificed. His groping. Remember how much trouble the elderly George Bush got when the elderly George Bush, as a retired president, was groping his nurse, because that's what, I hate to say it, very senile old men, when that dementia tend to be grabby, okay? So they made a whole big scandal about how he was groping his nurse. Okay, and I said, well, if that's the case, Mr. Biden is groping people right in front of the camera regularly. You know, come on, this is the way. But again, this is partisan politics. Again, movies and culture do matter. They help you understand the way we understand political reality. That's why I recommended those things. Now, we got not much time, and I don't want to spend it then. The prince is just, the big thing about Machiavelli here would be, and I don't want to spend much time, that I had the second thing would be talking about continuing the things. Remember what Machiavelli says about the way of prudential decision making. You know, in chapter 15, he talks about the virtues, right? He gives us the list. He goes that famous line. I need my glasses. I can't see a damn thing. He goes, he says, since it has been my intention to write a useful thing, this is the second sentence, I think it's second sentence, and page 93, to write a useful thing for he understands. It seems to me the prophet will go behind to the effectual truth, the effectual versus the ineffectual. A truth that's effectual versus a truth that's ineffectual. He wants to go to an effectual truth of the thing. Then to the imagined. So therefore, the effectual truth versus the imagined thing as well. And therefore, there have been imagined republics and principates that have never been seen or known to be in truth, because there is such a distance between how one lives and how one should live, that he who lets go to what is done for what ought to be done, learns his ruin rather his preservation. For man who wishes to profess the good in everything must need fall among so many who are not good. Hence it is necessary for a prince, if he wishes to maintain himself, to learn to be able to be not good, and to use it or not use it according to necessity. Omitting then these things, I say about imagined princes, and discussing those which are true, I shall say all men, wherever one speaks of them, and most especially princes, since they are placed so high, are noted for some things and some quality. Okay, this is like being a bad boy. Some qualities which bring them either praise or blame. And this is the term held liberal, so that some are held liberal, others misero. Now they use the word misero, using a Tuscan term, because avro in our language still denotes the use of by desire who have rapine, rape. In other words, if you want, okay, that's to take by force, to rape. This is someone. So misero is something else. He uses a different term here, misero. Because he says, misero we call the one who abstains from using his own. But whereas avro is to take others. There's two types of people. There's two types of people who don't have. They just don't use their own, stingy, the ones who are not going to take. It's liberal, the givers, and the other type is a not a giver. The other term, the term that's commonly used, is dangerous because it applies to rapacious. Something is rapacious. Rapacious means you don't have it, so you want it so badly you take it from other people. This is the danger of the rapaciousness. Rapaciousness is a thing that is horrible. And some are held to be givers, others rapacious, some cruel. He's giving us a list. Notice this, the list is pairing it, right? So liberal, misero. Then he has this discussion of misero. Then some are held givers, rapacious, cruel, full of pity. One faithless, other faithful. One effeminate, one pusillanimous. That means small-souled. So effeminate and small-souled, and the other fierce and spirited. So he pairs. He puts two things together. In other words, effeminate, effeminate means like a girl, like a woman, to be feminized, effeminate, and pusillanimous, small, the Latin word, small-souled. And then what? The other thing is compared to, it is, the spirit is fierce and spirited. The other human, the other proud. The other lascivious. Lascivious means kind of joyous, like the other, and kind of like fun to be around. Lascivious means someone who's like free with themselves and their feelings. The other chaste. One open, the other cunning. The one hard, the other easy. The one grave, the other light. The one religious, and the other skeptical. So watch that list. It's a good list. Now this list should replace the list of virtues and vices in there. And if you go to Aristotle's Ethics, he has that famous list the virtue is the middle ground, and there's the excessive of virtue and defect of virtue. But if you just do virtue, if you do the simple version, cowardice, courage, right? Moderation, immoderation, right? In other words, take the virtues and do like that. Now Machiavelli does something else. Notice, this is not the virtues, well, the good things and the bad things switch places here. And I know that everyone will confess that it would be most praiseworthy to a thing to find a prince all the qualities written above that are held to be good. But because one is not able to have or observe them wholly, for the human condition do not allow it, it is necessary for him to be prudent that he will know how to avoid the infamy of those vices which lose him the state, and if possible to guard himself against those which will not take it away. But if he cannot, he can with less concern let them go. And further, he should not concern himself about incurring the infamy of those vices without which it would be difficult to save the state. In other words, sometimes to save the state, you're going to have to do bad things, and those are vices. So therefore, if you need, in other words, I shouldn't do that because I have to be, this is what Weber talks about, clean hands. In other words, politics does not allow you to clean hands. If you have to save the state, if you want to save your society or save your people, you do what's necessary. That therefore, if it requires, if the security of your people and your state require you to do bad things, then you must do them. Because if you don't do them, and if the failure to act will cause your people to suffer or be endangered, then you failed. So therefore he says, In other words, you should don't worry about having to do the vices, get the infamy from vices that you must do. The same. If one will consider everything well, he will find something which will seem virtue itself, and as conforming to it will be his ruin, and something which will seem vice itself, and conforming to it will succeed in security, and the good being his. In other words, he's able to achieve the good. In other words, being good may end up trying to be good and virtuous may actually lead to ruin. While having everyone think you're bad, but you deliver the good. This is the famous thing by Bernard Menderville. It's called The Fable of the V's, where it's public virtue, private virtue, public vice, public vice, public virtue. This is the argument that that the real public good only happens by selfishness. That individual actors not being virtuous but being selfish, which is a vice. When the people are privately selfish, what ends up happening is the collective outcome of this produces the public good. But when people try to be privately virtuous, ultimately, and they impose virtue on the society, their virtue on others, this usually leads to public ruin. So this is by the way, that's modern theory. This is the concept of modern theory. That this is why we don't care about virtue. We just simply let the process of democratic actors operate in the way they do. Now, he goes through here, and I'll leave this one line. This is why cruelty and pity, this is fantastic in that one. Why it's better to be ruled than loved. He goes, this is the third paragraph. This is the third paragraph on page 101. From this arises a dispute. Is it better to be loved than feared, or the reverse? One may respond that one would wish to be both, the one and the other, but since it's difficult to mix these qualities together, it is safer to be feared than loved. For if the two must be lacking, for one can say this generally of men, human beings, that they are ungrateful, fickle, hypocrites, dissemblers, that means liars, people who lie, evaders of danger, lovers of gain, and while you do them good, they are wholly yours, wholly offering blood, good life, and sons, as has been said above, when the need is far off, but when it approaches you, they revolt. And the prince who founds himself wholly on their words, if he finds himself naked in other preparations, will be ruined. For friends which one acquires for a price, and not from the greatness and nobility of mind, one merits them, but one does not have them. And when a time comes, they cannot be spent. This is a great line. What is the purpose of friends? To spend them. So if you buy your friends, they won't. When you need to spend them, you can't spend them. The people who you buy, the only friends that are really yours are because of what? Because of your greatness, or acquired because of your greatness and your nobility of mind. They like you and they want you and they follow you because of that. If they're there because you bought them, you gave them things, done things like this, when the time comes, you can't spend those people.
So that's kind of soft power, right?
No, it's not soft power, because you're spending them.
No, but
You're using them. No, charisma is soft power, exactly.
Yeah, no, but I said regarding the true friends that you mentioned.
Yeah, true friends happen because no, because you're great. It's because of your character, your attractiveness to them. They love you. They want to, they love you because something about you and your character has them attracted to you. They're yours because they're your friends because they give themselves to you. You didn't have to buy them. Okay? And therefore they can be spent. And men are less cautious about offending the one who they made his loved, and the one has made himself feared. For love is maintained by a chain of obligations, which, because men's wickedness is easily broken on every occasion of their own utility. But fear is maintained by a dread of punishment, which never abandons you. Okay? In other words, love, men are fickle. Men change their minds. They love you one minute, they don't love you the next. And if there's too much cost, I'll not love you anymore. All right? Whereas fear, you don't. If you truly fear them, you're going to be. If you fear them, you're not going to change your mind. You're going to do what he says or she says. Fear is the most powerful motivating force. It ensures loyalty and consistency. Love doesn't. And he has that famous line. Now the problem here is, again, you should always be careful about what? Avoiding hatred. That's how he ends the thing. I conclude then, returning, this is on page 103, the last paragraph. I conclude then, returning to the question of being feared or being loved, since men love at their own pleasure and fear and the prince's pleasure, a wise prince should found himself on that which is his, not upon which is dependent upon others. And he ought to contrive to avoid hatred. Because why? It's when the people hate you or held you in contempt. The danger is becoming so hated and so, in other words, if you become hated or held in contempt, the danger is that if they don't fear you anymore because you don't have power, then what? You're lost. You're over. Game over. So therefore, that's the danger here. In other words, it's being feared is more powerful than being loved, but you need to avoid being what? Hated. You can't be hated. This is one of the things about undid Thatcher. Thatcher became hated over time. A segment of the society hated Thatcher so much that to this very day they will go to her grave and piss on her and do things. You know, people will, even after they're dead, will want to seek to harm you. Like her statue, they stripped her statue in Grantham. All right. They did. In other words, that segment of society. There's a segment of British society who hate her, and they will continue hating her. Their children will hate her. They'll teach hatred of her, and that's a very dangerous thing. But they were never powerful enough. In other words, they were only like 10%, 15% of society, and that's today's society. If the Conservative Party really, come on, if the today's Tory Party had any balls, what would they do to these protesters? If Thatcher was alive, she'd throw them in jail. I think they should be thrown in jail. The police is too woke. Fire the bring the old people, the old cops back. Let them loose on the thugs. No guns. I mean, the British police only the multicultural police of Britain have to carry guns. The old British police never had to have to worry about a gun. They were able to deal with the criminals without a gun. They'd beat them up and knock the shit out of them, and take a bully club and beat the living crap out of them, but they didn't have to use a gun. Today's British police have to use automatic weapons to stop criminals. This is the irony about this, right? In other words, today's police is nicer, friendlier, more diverse, but much more violent than the old violent cops of the past. That's the other politically incorrect thought of the day, in that sense. So we'll stop here and we'll end and have a good day. We're at the end of the thing and we're going to get rain any second, the system says. Have a good day, see you in the exam, and take care.